Looking for an electric bike? Want to convert a bike you already have? Or just looking for an extra battery for your e-bike? Check out our range at lebikes.co.uk. Hey everybody, what is up? My name is Liam Angell, aka Straight Shooting LJ, and welcome to this LE Bikes opinion piece. Now, what I'm going to do with this episode is I'm going to delve into something a little more kind of personal. So not necessarily, not a news article or anything like that, but I'm going to look at the different types of electric bikes. So in terms of motor positions, that's where I'm going to focus on today. So mid-drive, rear hub, front hub. Those are the predominant three types of electric bikes that you can get on the market today. There are some other kind of more niche ones, but that's kind of a different topic. But in terms of, obviously, I'm going to be giving my opinion. So in terms of preference, there is one that I prefer out of the three. And I'll give you the reasons why in a sec. But let's go a bit into the differences between each one. So let's start with the front hubs. Front hub motors. Now, you generally tend to see these, you will see these on full-size bikes, but more often than not, it's the kind of smaller folding bikes that you will tend to see the front hub motors on. And with these, it's kind of like the weight is somewhat evenly distributed because the motors are obviously in the front wheel. But it is a case of, because you're sitting towards the back and most of your weight is kind of back centered, then it is one of them ones where a front wheel hub will kind of be quite nice on the commute, although it will struggle a little bit up hills. And personally, I'm not necessarily a fan of the front hub motors, just purely because of that sensation that you get. Because the motor is at the front, the battery is generally at the back. Because the motor's at the front, you generally have a sensation of being pulled. So it doesn't quite give a natural riding sensation in terms of what you kind of would expect from a regular bike. So I said it's more kind of a pulling sensation, like it's pulling you along, as opposed to you're kind of cruising along a bit more naturally. But as said, the front hubs, not necessarily my preference, but as said, they tend to kind of be on the kind of smaller folding bikes, such as the Zinc folding bike sets. You kind of tend to find them there as well. Also, I think some of the Bromptons are actually made with front hub motors as well. So it is one of them ones, but they do have a little bit of a design flaw that they share with the rear hub motors, which I'm going to get onto in a second. And this is the fact that the front wheel does generally have a cable coming out on a right angle. And that cable has 9 little tiny wires inside it. And two of the problems actually. One is if that cable becomes damaged, like it gets hit by anything or anything like that, because it's kind of on a right angle, there's a lot of pressure on it already, so it doesn't take much to damage one of those cables. But also as well is the fact that if you damage one of those wires inside there, let alone 2 or 3, it's a very, very finicky job to be able to rectify it, repair, and basically put the cable back together, and that can get quite expensive. But as said, that shares that property along with the rear hub motors as well. So rear hub motors. I've just spoken about the front hubs. The rear hubs as said, they do kind of share that similar design flaw with the cable coming out of the back, in terms of it being on a right angle, and if you tap it, it's quite easy to damage it, and also it can be quite costly to replace it. Now, also with rear hubs, obviously you do have to have a very reinforced rear wheel if you're doing, say, a rear hub conversion, or if you want to move the rear hub and all of its spokes and do a wheel rebuild, which we've done a few of. If you wanted to move it over to another wheel, you have to make sure that wheel is double walled. You have to make sure you're getting quite heavy gauge spokes as well. So with the rear hubs, again, not necessarily my preference, but I do actually quite enjoy riding bikes like an Engwe. The Carrera range, the Carrera E-Spec range are actually pretty good as well. So it is one of them ones where we've done repairs on the Carrera E-Spec range. The Engways we sell on our website, I said I'm a fan of them because you do generally get the fat tire ones that are rear hub motors. These, to me, feel more like mopeds, where you're basically the sensation is kind of like you're being pushed along, especially the further up the chain you go in terms of wattage. So your Engways usually hover around 750 to 1000 watts. You do feel like you're very much getting pushed along. And the only thing for me with the front hub and also the rear hubs as well as the design flaw with the cable coming out, it does make replacing an inner tube. So say you get a puncture, I always, because e-bikes are naturally heavier, whether they're mid-drives, front hubs or rear hubs, because they're naturally heavier, it's just a case of patching a tire has never really worked for me. Tried it on a number of occasions, but in my early days with e-bikes, and it was one of them ones where I thought, you know what, I am just going to carry spare inner tubes with me. And one of the issues with the front hubs and the rear hubs is that you have to be so careful getting that wheel on and off. And there are some rear hub motors and front hub motors where you can't just unplug the wheel before you take it off. The wiring is pretty much solid all the way through. I remember pedelec, their bikes used to be like that. No slight on them, just saying. Their bikes used to be like that, and I did have an experience whilst working in an electric bike shop where we did end up having to replace a rear wheel because the cable had been damaged. It was pretty much a two-man job trying to get the wheel back in, and then obviously make sure the torque arm was okay and all that, and then that started coming. It was a major headache just to basically replace a puncture and replace what was a torn inner tube. So for me, rear hubs are not necessarily my preference. I do actually have a Carrera Cross City, a mini folding bike, which is a rear hub, and I've recently rewired a battery into it. So rear hubs do have their uses, very much so, and the controllers are actually pretty flexible, but you do sometimes have that issue where you could get exactly the same controller or the exact same display if you need to replace those, and they won't work. And I've noticed that has happened a lot more on the hub motors, so the front hub and the rear hubs, than say the mid drives, for instance, which I'll come on to in a sec. So again, rear hubs, not necessarily my preference, but I prefer them over the front hubs. So order-wise, I would put rear hubs over front hubs. And there's a lot more of a diversity of range in terms of bikes with the rear hubs. But obviously with the rear hubs, I said there are still some of the design flaws, as I like to call them, from the front hubs. And it's a case of there are certain, if you're looking for a more natural riding sensation, then the rear hubs may not be the way to go. But that's me personally. This is purely opinion. Finally, mid-drive motors. My personal favorite of the three types. And with the mid-drive motors, it is a case of the riding sensation is a lot more natural, because to me the weight is more centered. Now also as well, it is not necessarily, mid-drive conversions are not necessarily destructive, because you can remove the bottom bracket, and then if you wanted to convert back from electric to non-electric, you can just take out the mid-drive motor, say the Bafangs, you can just take that back out, put your old bottom bracket back in, and then boom, you're pretty much good to go. It's very much non-destructive. Whereas the other two, you do have to basically have reinforced forks. Your rear wheel may need additional support in terms of torque arms. And yeah, it is just one of them ones where the mid-drive sensation is a lot more fluid, and also getting up hills is, I think, a lot better on the mid-drives. You do keep your gears. You do keep your gears intact, because it doesn't do anything to your rear wheel or your front wheel, and that makes replacing punctures so much easier and quicker. Yes, your bike is still heavier, but as said, because there's been no modification to the rear wheel or the front wheel, you just replace a puncture like you would on a regular bicycle. So that for me, like, major advantage of a mid-drive motor. Now, in terms of a con of the mid-drive motors, you do have to have a little more expertise in terms of opening them up and knowing what you're doing. Because when you open the Bafang motors up, there is a big gear inside and then a smaller gear inside. And you have to be aware of the bearings. You have to be very careful when you're taking it apart. You have to be very careful to put it together the right way. Make sure you don't lose a gasket or anything like that. So you do have to have a little more expertise. It's not just put something in the back wheel and then you're off. You do need a couple of tools, your bottom bracket removal tool, bunch of Allen keys, stuff like that. But the intercompatibility between displays, replacing a controller is relatively simple as well. Re-greasing that motor is relatively simple too. To me, there's a lot less that can go wrong with a mid-drive motor. Yes, you do have to have a bit more mechanical expertise, but as said, you get to keep your rear gears as well. So, as said, I prefer the mid-drive motors. I really do prefer the mid-drive motors. I've got Bafangs that I've done conversions on, three separate ones of my bikes, 2 full-sized, 1 folding as well. So it's on there, and that's just me personally. So it is one of them ones where I prefer the mid-drive out of the 3. So in terms of the front and rear hubs though, there is the one advantage where if worse comes to worse, in an extreme condition and your chain snaps, one of the major drawbacks of a mid-drive motor is the fact that if your chain snaps, you're pretty much having to wheel your bike along, because you would lose all of your gears. Now with the rear hubs, you would still be able to basically pedal the bike along if your chain snaps. But it is one of them ones where, yeah, you still because, as I said, because the rear wheel would still spin, you would in theory still be able to continue with a snap chain. You just wouldn't be able to change gears. So you could in theory go throttle only and ping with that. You can't do that on the mid-drive motors, because obviously your front derailleur, your front mech set has been taken out. So if your chain snaps, there's no link between the rear wheel and the front mech on a mid-drive. So that's kind of a major drawback. But in conclusion, front hubs, rear hubs, mid-drives. I personally go for the mid-drives because for me it's a more natural riding sensation and the weight is centered, which I prefer. I don't jump down curbs and stuff like that anyway, so that doesn't really make much of a difference to me. But if you're on a rear hub motor, I would always say avoid jumping curbs if you can, because that weight and that force hitting the floor, That's basically all of your body weight. If you're sitting down, that's all of your body weight, plus the heavier wheel, plus the motor in the center of that rear wheel. That can cause some serious damage if you're not careful. And we have done wheel rebuilds for people where that has been the case. So that's something to watch out for. On a mid-drive, it is a case of all of these motors, front, mid, and rear hub. It is a case of they do have vulnerabilities when it comes to water. But to me, in my experience, it has always been that the mid-drives seem to be the most waterproofed out of the three types as well. So that is definitely something to bear in mind when looking at and potentially purchasing your next electric bike. Hopefully my opinions have helped on front hub, rear hub, and mid-drive. Hopefully that has helped. We have a range of all three at lebikes.co.uk. We'd love to know your views. What do you prefer? Front hub, rear hub, or mid-drive? What kind of bike do you prefer? Because variety is the spice of life. I prefer a mid-drive. I don't mind rear hubs. Not so keen on front hubs. But it is one of them ones. What do you prefer? lebikes.co.uk is our website. youtube.com/@lebikes is us on YouTube. We've got tips and tricks, we've got opinion pieces, and so much more video content up there on YouTube. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, facebook.com/lebikesltd. Have a look for us, LE-Bikes and LE-Bikes LTD on the social networks. Have a look for us. As I said, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, have a look for us. Wherever you are, you will find us as well. And I said, lebikes.co.uk is the official website. We are official suppliers for Himiway Long Range electric bikes, Engwe electric bikes as well. We've got a range of both brands. Also, we do bike to e-bike conversions. If you've got a bike you love, get in touch with us and we will see if we can convert it into electric for you. We trust the Bafang mid-drive motors. That is where we've laid our hats in terms of what we trust for our conversions. Most bikes can be converted, from Carrera Hellcats to folding in Carrera Intercities or Dahons. So many other brands, Specialized. Just so many other brands that we can convert into electric. I have been Liam Angell, aka Straight Shooting LJA, and until next time, take care people and happy riding. Take care everyone. Mid-drive motor conversion kits, ready-made e-bikes, batteries, bike to e-bike conversions, custom builds and more. Start your journey into electric bikes at lebikes.co.uk.